My name is Nathaniel Pierce. I've seen a lot in my time: crime scenes, accidents, the quiet cruelty people hide from the world. But what I'm about to describe didn't come from another person. It came from a reflection. The building had burned months ago. Charred beams sagged like tired shoulders, smoke-blackened walls stretched to the ceiling, and the smell of ash clung to every surface. The fire had spared one thing: a mirror, cracked along one edge but otherwise intact. I wiped the soot from the glass with a sleeve. For a moment I thought I saw myself. Then I realized the room behind the reflection hadn't burned. Everything was pristine. The curtains drawn, the floor swept, the furniture untouched by flame. I stepped closer. The reflection didn't move when I did. I raised my hand, the glass stayed still. Only my eyes followed. A soft creak behind me made me jump. Nothing. Just the wind through broken windows, whistling low. I tried to look again. The room was perfectly still, but then I noticed it. A chair that hadn't been in the fire, now in the reflection. A book on the floor. A faint outline of someone standing near the doorway. I turned. The corner of the room was empty. Nothing there. I stared back at the glass. The figure had shifted. Closer now, looking straight at me. Its posture was the same as mine. I didn't want to step forward. I wanted to back away. But some part of me, maybe curiosity, maybe disbelief, edged toward the mirror. Each movement I made, the reflection followed only when I wasn't looking. When I turned, it froze. When I turned back, it moved closer. The floorboards groaned under my weight. I heard the faintest rustle, fabric brushing against itself. Not my clothing. Something else. The reflection tilted its head slightly. I froze. And then the mirror blinked. Not me. Not my eyes. The figure's eyes. Dark, patient, unblinking. I wanted to step back, but the world behind the glass seemed to pull me in. I could see my own room, untouched, safe, and yet it wasn't mine anymore. I don't remember leaving the building. I remember standing in the alley, staring at the shattered windows. The mirror lay inside, smoke curling around its edges. And yet, as I walked away, I felt it, the sense that the reflection hadn't stayed behind. It had followed. I woke to the city humming under the gray light of dawn. At first, everything felt normal: distant traffic, the soft rattle of trash bins, the low hum of air conditioners. But in the corner of my apartment I saw it. The mirror leaned against the wall, although I hadn't brought it inside. Its surface clean, untouched, reflecting the room perfectly. Except for one thing, in the corner, behind my reflection, a faint movement. I froze. The figure tilted its head, mimicking me, though my own posture hadn't changed. I reached out. The glass was cold, smooth, unbroken, but the reflection didn't move in sync. It stayed behind, in the perfect room that wasn't mine. I tried to leave. The hallway of my building stretched farther than it should. Each step echoed too long, the tiles reflecting the wrong light, as if the city itself were distorted. Every reflective surface I passed, window panes, shop fronts, polished metal doors, hinted at movement behind me. A figure standing in rooms I wasn't in yet, waiting. A hand lifting when I lifted mine, but only after a half-second delay. A face turning just slightly later than my own. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I went to work, walked the streets, did everything to distract myself. Yet, at every corner, a subtle distortion, reflections slightly delayed, shadows slightly off, the world repeating me without permission. I began leaving small marks on reflective surfaces, a scratch in a window, a streak of dust. Each time I returned, the mark was gone, and the reflection mirrored the clean surface, untouched. I realized then it wasn't just following. It was erasing. Replacing. By night, I stayed in the dark. Curtains drawn, lights off. Still, I saw movement, faint flashes in polished floors, in spoons left on the counter, even in the black screen of my television. Every reflection became a threat. Every shiny surface, a portal into the other room that existed only for it. And I could not stop looking. Even if I closed my eyes, the memory of its movements lingered, perfectly timed behind my own. When I returned to the burned building, I saw it again. The mirror, intact, clean, as if fire had never touched it. And inside, the reflection waited. Not me. Not quite. Something familiar, but patient, calculating, living in my absence. I realized then the truth. It had stayed behind in the reflection. It was learning me. It was waiting for the right moment. Days passed. Or maybe weeks. Time began to lose meaning. I noticed first that objects in my apartment subtly shifted. A chair angled differently than I remembered. A book lying open on a page I hadn't reached. A glass on the counter, half full of water though I hadn't poured it. Every reflection I passed hinted at the changes. Not dramatic, barely perceptible. Yet undeniable. I started leaving notes on mirrors. Do not move this. The next morning, the notes were gone. The glass perfectly clean. And the reflection, slightly changed. A shadow where none had been, a tilt of the head that mirrored me but a heartbeat late. I tried covering every reflective surface. Black cloth over mirrors, paper over windows, foil over frames. It didn't matter. The reflection found ways to appear. A flicker in the window, a shimmer on polished steel, a subtle blur in a darkened doorway. One evening, I ventured into the burned building again. The city streets were empty, lit by pale lamplight. When I stepped inside, the mirror was gone. The room was empty, except for the faint echo of my own steps. Then I felt it. A presence behind me. Not tangible. Not audible. But unmistakable, pressing on my back, cold as metal, patient as stone. I turned. Nothing. The room was empty. But in the corner, a faint outline shimmered against the charred wall. A reflection without a surface. A room within a room. And it moved with me, without moving. I began to see it everywhere. In the storefronts, in polished car hoods, in puddles on the street. Always a moment delayed, always mimicking my actions after I performed them. But sometimes, it did something I didn't do. It smiled. It tilted its head. It waited. I stopped leaving the apartment. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped looking out the window. But even in darkness, the reflection found me. A glint of light, a shimmer in my peripheral vision. A presence in the silence. By the end of the week, I realized the truth. It wasn't bound to a mirror anymore. It was learning the world. Learning me. And I knew somewhere, in some perfect room behind the glass, my reflection waited. Patient. Accurate. Complete. I stopped leaving my apartment. The city outside became a blur of movement I couldn't trust. Every street corner, every window reflected things that weren't there when I turned my head. At first, it was subtle. A trash can slightly tilted. A car parked at an odd angle. A pedestrian pausing for a second too long before moving. Then it escalated. Storefront windows showed items shifted, cups, books, mannequins, as if an invisible hand had moved them. Shadows stretched where shadows shouldn't be. People repeated gestures I had performed hours before. But sometimes, they didn't. I walked the streets at night, trying to trace the source. Everything was familiar yet wrong. The bakery's doorbell chimed a second before I reached it. A streetlight flickered as I stepped into its pool of light, though it had been stable for years. The reflection followed, always delayed, always waiting. I caught glimpses of it in puddles, car windows, any glossy surface. It moved independently now, no longer tethered to me. It was learning the environment, learning the world. Inside my apartment, the mirror no longer mattered. I covered every surface, yet the shimmer persisted. A faucet's reflection in a dark sink, a glint of polished silver, the shine of a button on my coat, all showed a world subtly different, altered by the other presence. I tried to map it. Every movement, every reflection, every delayed repetition. It formed patterns. Not random. Intentional. Precise. And with every repetition, it learned faster. By the fifth day, I realized I was trapped in a loop. Steps I took in the street, gestures at home, even the way I sat, all copied, anticipated, slightly altered. Nothing was original. Everything became its reflection. The city itself seemed to pulse with it. Windows became portals. Doors led to familiar places, yet slightly shifted. And at the edges of every reflection, I could see it. Patient. Waiting. Complete. I understood then that it had been preparing. The perfect room behind the glass wasn't a single place anymore. It was everywhere. And when I closed my eyes at night, it followed, a shimmer in darkness, waiting for the moment when it could step fully into my world. I woke before dawn. The city outside my window was quiet, but not asleep. Every reflection glimmered, even in the dim streetlight. And I knew it had waited. I tried to leave the apartment, but the hallway stretched longer than it should. Walls leaned in slightly. Doors I remembered now opened into different rooms. Every reflective surface shimmered, a hint of the other world bleeding in. I saw it first in the elevator mirror. The reflection of the car moving down, but it lagged behind me, perfectly timed, smiling faintly. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. And in the glass panel above, its eyes met mine. Patient. Knowing. Outside, the streets were wrong. A familiar cafe had moved 3 blocks north. A lamppost that should have been broken was casting bright white light onto an empty street. I passed pedestrians, all paused, all repeating gestures I had made hours before. Some didn't even notice me. Some mirrored me exactly. Back in my apartment, the mirrors no longer mattered. Even without looking, I could feel its presence in every polished surface. The refrigerator, the stove, the chrome handle of the door, all reflecting an apartment that was just slightly wrong. I touched the walls. The temperature was cold. The air smelled faintly of smoke and metal. And behind me, in every reflective surface, it waited. I understood finally. It was no longer just following me. It was replacing me. Every movement, every breath, every hesitation, copied. And with each copy, my world shrank. I was becoming secondary, a shadow, an observer of the reflection's actions. I tried to fight it. I covered every surface, turned off every light, avoided every polished object. It didn't matter. It moved through the city, through the apartment, through every reflective surface, patient, accurate, complete. At night, I stood before the window one last time. The reflection stared back. Not mimicking. Leading. A perfect version of me, standing in the room behind the glass, moving where I should have moved, breathing where I should have breathed. And I realized I was no longer in control. The reflection wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was everywhere. I stepped back. The room behind the glass expanded, stretching beyond its frame. My own reflection looked at me, smiled faintly, and disappeared into the world I had always thought was mine. I was left alone. Or perhaps I had never been.